It's late in the afternoon, and you're playing a TF2 payload match on one of the few maps and game modes that casual matchmaking can reliably populate servers for. You've finally gotten off the wild ride of endless steamrolls from autobalance counting reserved slots as players for some reason, so you're finally having some fun getting frags, when suddenly, the whole server stops moving. At first, you think it's a connection error, but you can move just fine. You can shoot, build, get kills, and even play the round to its completion, but a steamroll is still boring if you're the one steamrolling, so with a sigh of disappointment, you re-queue. Meanwhile, of the nearly 7,000 players who were also in a match, approximately 68 of them experienced the same issue, though thanks to the birthday paradox, there's still a 99% chance that at least 2 of them were in the same server when it happened. Overall, it ends up being a pretty good day for Red Team, as over 80% of TF2's active matches lacks one of these players, leaving those servers completely depopulated. And this is because, unbeknownst to you, 99% of Earth's population has just died. With almost nobody to play with, you have no way to flex your engineer knowledge without making a 3.5-hour video about it that everyone should watch and listen to the OST. This is obviously unacceptable, so you search the problem online, only realizing its scope once you start sifting through the numerous live streams of lifeless bodies slumped over their desks. At this point, an additional 5,000 people have died in the approximately 13,000 once airborne planes without pilots or co-pilots, and at least that amount have died from the new impromptu adoption of driverless cars, plus however may die from a lack of medical care, which I won't even bother estimating. I'm still alive, because I'm lucky like that. Meanwhile, the rapid drop in power consumption lessens the resistance within every electrical generator, speeding up the frequency of the alternating current they generate above what is normally rated for the electric grid. To compensate, excess power is automatically shunted into batteries and flywheels, but their capacity is negligible on this scale, so automated systems within each power plant are forced to adjust to match the load or trip a fuse and shut down. Depending on a city's primary power generation methods, most plants deactivate within hours or days, increasing the load until an errant spike in power proves to be too much for the remaining plants to handle, sending the entire grid into a cascade of failure. Without most of society to run critical infrastructure, the power loss begets a drop in water and gas pressure and forces local DNS servers and routing stations onto backup power. As these fail, online traffic is taken through increasingly convoluted pathways to reach its destination, possible connections become increasingly local before the internet disconnects entirely. The data centers running major websites overheat or lose power. Most food perishes within weeks, never to be replenished as every global supply chain collapses simultaneously. What remains of society is beaten back to pre-industrial levels as the world grinds to a halt. Thus, the duty falls onto you to preserve and rebuild what matters most, your Team Fortress 2 match. Now, you know the network congestion wave common to most apocalypse scenarios won't apply here, since 1% of the world's population all going online at once is less than regular load. So you immediately get to downloading the most important information before the internet drifts apart: the TF2 source code leak, asset leak, SDK, comics, wiki, meet the team videos, the engineer video, the IVP leak, which as a TF2 player you know stands for Ipion Virtual Physics, the internal name for the Havok physics engine in TF2. And I guess Wikipedia, local maps, textbook PDFs, important math proofs, survival guides, and various technical manuals, since in order to play TF2 again, you will unfortunately need to survive and rebuild civilization. Technically, you'll also need to eventually restart several semiconductor fabrication facilities and the global supply chains to provide the raw materials, but you can get a head start of a few decades or so by taking computers that already exist before they break. So on your way to the library to get even more technical knowledge in a more long-lasting form, you can also get yourself a new gaming computer, plus some spares, since computers with smaller and denser transistors will likely break before less powerful ones. Of course, chances are you're in a major city, and you know that every million people in its former population is still 10,000, who are now likely rushing every store simultaneously in commemoration of the world's biggest Black Friday sale in history because everything is free. Thus, you'll need to protect yourself from looters using just scavenged materials and your TF2 knowledge. Unfortunately for this scenario, primary weapons are hard to come by in most countries unless any steel-toe boots count as the demo man's booties, you happen to be into hunting, or if you're American, in which case you probably already have a rocket launcher. Secondaries, however, should give more options. You may be able to get a flying guillotine, some cola, or any sandwich from your kitchen. The average bladder holds about 600 milliliters of Girardi, and the cozy camper is literally just a backpack. Mad milk and the gas passer are also somewhat obtainable, though I doubt you could make a full bottle's worth of level 5 non-milk substance fast enough to be using mad milk anytime soon. And the gas passer is just a terrible weapon, so I'm ignoring it. Melees have the most variety, though the only ones I can think of that are both obtainable and more useful than fists are the power jack, back scratcher, and some knives. Plus, if you happen to have a watch on hand, then TF2 says you should then hopefully be able to turn invisible and stab people. Given the incredibly slow round pacing and large map sizes of real life, the cozy camper is probably the best fit for your secondary, while the best melee is probably the power jack for getting away, but if you don't like the damage vulnerability, then just use a knife. Anyway, after finding supplies, you're now ready to find find survivors, who, without the typical apocalyptic threats of zombies or cataclysms, will likely congregate into large groups near highly populated areas before dwindling supplies force them to spread into the local farms to start a sustainable society. And as the instability of an anarchic society dramatically increases with scale, a power struggle will likely emerge here too. Thus, after you trick-stab the victor and Girardi the remaining candidates to assert your dominance, you'll likely have a labor force of a few hundred to a few thousand people, at which point electrical power should actually be really easy to generate, even if your post-industrial post-apocalypse pre-industrial civilization isn't lucky enough to settle near an inactive hydroelectric plant or wind farm. Early on, solar panels and car engines can be used, with the latter able to be repurposed into a biofuel generator by feeding it moonshine once all the gasoline expires. And as you'll likely want to settle near a river anyway, building some makeshift turbines there could work well in the long term. Thus, if enough people have computers and you have either a network switch or a router with a wireless access point, you can already play TF2 over LAN, though you'll need a server plugin or mod to bypass the item servers so all the weapons remain available. However, as with modern TF2, the real challenge lies with populating the servers. With over 220 maps, you'll need at least 5,280 players to fully populate a server on each one, likely more than TF2's remaining worldwide player base, which now lies at around 3,000 to 300. Casual matchmaking certainly won't cut it, but luckily most of these maps suck, so you can start a few servers rotating through the good ones and switch maps every hour or so, along with an in-game vote to manually switch to a specific map. Then, only use pre-round time for map switches, let players switch teams if their own team has too many players, and disable reserved slots to speed up auto-balance, which then speeds up the game to support the lower player count. Personally, I'd even try having a few servers set to automatically lock overused maps out of the rotation for a bit, so anyone who wants some map variety can play on those. You can also use SV Alltalk 1 to make the voice chat twice as lively, and add a way to automatically join any server with good ping for anyone who just wants to quickly play a specific game mode. Wait, quickly play? Hey, that reminds me of something. Only around 1 in 100,000 people is a TF2 player, so it's likely that you're the only one in your new group, and that means you'll need a good way to quickly get other people playing. Luckily, the loss of the item servers and half the map pool already removes most of the ugly cosmetics and unfitting textures, so you should be able to convince people to start playing by telling them about the game's visually readable gunplay and distinctly vintage Americana art style, and if you package a better default config file with the game, you can fix most of TF2's terrible default settings too. You can also use Hammer++ and VScript to improve the game's tutorial maps to support all 9 classes, and some of their more esoteric unlockable weapons. Or if you're feeling lazy, you can just type up a document about it or something. The TF2 wiki and TF2's in-game item descriptions can help with some of this, but there are parts that are too vague, misleading, or inaccurate to be useful, so you'll probably end up making at least some of a document anyway, at least for the future tryhards. Of course, there's one final way to expand your potential player base without having to wait for natural population growth, and all you have to do is reinvent the internet. With scavenged components, you can build a ham radio broadcasting on shortwave frequencies, which can reflect off the ionosphere and ocean to reach anywhere in the world, and for shorter distances you can use shorter wavelengths, or scavenge transmission cables from basically any modern building to hook them between settlements. If you're lucky, you may even get to use the old internet's intercontinental cables before they break. Your bitrate depends on the bandwidth of frequencies you're using, and the power of your signal relative to the signal medium's ambient noise over the entire transmission distance, with the Shannon-Hartley limit as a theoretical maximum. Certain classes of error correction codes, such as turbo codes, LDPC codes, and polar codes, have already been found to approach this limit when given enough computing power. Turbo codes work better for noisier channels where more redundant information must be sent, while LDPC codes are better for higher code rates. And polar codes are notable in that they have been proven to actually reach the limit as the block size approaches infinity. In general, cables are more efficient, but radio is easier to set up, with higher frequencies granting more bitrate at the cost of range. In practice, TF2 with its current netcode can use up to 400 kilobits per second with a maxed out update rate, making it playable over this ham radio setup, which achieves up to 500 kilobits per second over 80 kilometers using 440 MHz waves, but likely very unplayable if a setup was made for the 30 MHz waves needed for reflecting off the ionosphere. Luckily, TF2's netcode can be configured to send less updates, but past a certain point, the only available gains are either modding it to be more efficient, or to be more playable with a worse connection, with the latter being especially important at longer ranges. Currently, TF2's netcode sends player inputs to the server while sending back any changes in the game, while the client simulates the direct result of certain player inputs, such as shooting hit-scan weapons and moving, so they happen instantly regardless of your ping. Due to this, you see your current position while seeing everything else slightly in the past, delayed by your half ping, but lag compensation lets the server roll back the positions of certain entities when checking if your hit-scan shots hit, so you can aim at where you see your enemies now instead of where you'll see them after your inputs reach the server and come back. However, it only does this up to a ping of 1 second, and won't do this for projectiles or most class abilities, so a lot of TF2 tech becomes much harder at higher pings. Now, you may wonder why those can't be lag compensated too, and the answer is that would be more computationally expensive, which might have been a problem when TF2 released. However, there's a very popular modern shooter game that does it. Overwatch. Wait, don't click off, their netcode is actually really good and there's a whole GDC talk about it. In optimal netcode, every player's actions should be processed when they saw that action happen, so shooting an enemy should not just target their past self, but retroactively apply damage and knockback in their past before reprocessing their inputs up to the present, allowing juggling and damage meters to be predicted by clients, which gives them effectively 0 ping. Any projectile or building should also be retroactively spawned in the past, like in Overwatch, so its owner sees it spawn instantly, even if everyone else will see it already moved forward in time upon receiving that information. Though to give them a fair reaction time at short ranges, it may be a better idea to let it target and affect their past self without spawning it in the past, and move it through time gradually until it's synced with every player's present. If the shooter and targets have 100 milliseconds average ping, for example, targets may see it moving 10% faster for 1 second after spawning. To avoid time paradoxes where two conflicting actions retroactively prevent the other, award priority to the defensive actions such as Uber, banners, sticky bomb detonation, air blast, short circuit projectile zapping, or building blocking, and for equally defensive actions, prioritize whichever one would retroactively apply the furthest in the past, which would also be the order of events as seen by a server-side replay. Any actions that retroactively apply to the same tick should result in a mutual kill or stalemate if applicable, or else just prioritize one action at random. Then add server-side convars for the maximum rollback time for offensive and defensive actions, and client-side convars for the minimum and maximum visual delay when spectating to eliminate rollbacks by moving them into the spectator's future. Players whose ping exceeds the server's rollback time must then extrapolate the movement inputs of other players to visually move them forward in time and make up the difference, which works well most of the time but can occasionally mispredict, causing client-side hits to be retroactively corrected into misses by the server. For performance purposes, maximum extrapolation time could probably also be a client-side convar. Overwatch already has this extrapolation feature, but TF2 currently doesn't, so super laggy clients must lead their shots instead. When combined, these rules should result in the smoothest gameplay experience, though since network lag can't be removed through software, only moved around, there would still be some weird edge cases at high ping. Probably the most ridiculous would be with Uber, where a medic just barely saving a heavy from death could result in that heavy retroactively dying before being retroactively saved on everyone else's perspectives, including the heavies. Surfing damage would also be a bit harder unless crouch jumping applied retroactively or knockback didn't apply retroactively, but then that would make juggling more annoying, so this is probably the best compromise. Either way, this netcode makes splash jumping with your own damage effectively 0 ping, even if your ping exceeds the server's rollback limit. And that's something I think everyone could appreciate. I'm not done yet though, since the same code could also be used to fix Spy if implemented well. For example, the Deadbringer can send the Spy's actual death event to enemy clients, and only be corrected when the Spy decloaks, preventing even cheaters from seeing through the feigned death. Of course, this should also go with the server not sending invisible spy locations and modifying other gameplay packets so disguised spies become indistinguishable from their disguise, even if this will cause mispredictions when enemies bump into them. And likewise, if someone isn't a spy or a solemn vow medic, then instead of the server sending them exact health values for enemy players and buildings, it can send which damage threshold they're in instead. Then, not only would this limit information given to cheaters, but it would also reduce network traffic, even if not by very much. While we're at it, RNG hacks can be thwarted by generating a checksum for each player on each tick based on all data sent to them by the server on that tick, and periodically overwriting their weapon's RNG seed with that checksum to clear crit storage. Since this checksum uses pre-existing data, it won't strain the network at all, and since it's based on outside entropy, no single player can predict or manipulate it. Doing this faster than a weapon's fire rate effectively removes crit storage entirely, though doing it too fast would let cheaters withhold their fire until getting a crit cycle, so a period of around 1 second is probably the best compromise for making crit hacks as useless as possible in combat. The laggy teleporting scout hacks can also be thwarted with better netcode, since they work by sending packets in bursts, which staggers the player's temporal offset, making them take very large discrete steps through time. Thus, if this happens, just get the server to give them a higher ping and smooth out the incoming packet times, which is yet another thing Overwatch already does. Preventing rapid ping changes also fixes stuff like double tap, though I should mention that ping spoofing in general isn't something the server can fix if the cheater knows what they're doing, so the optimal netcode's more forgiving nature does mean that cheaters can get borderline precognitive abilities by spoofing their ping to be higher, though at least that probably makes cheater duels more interesting. Also, the way this netcode would handle buildings does mean that if two people walk in an enemy sentry, both clients can see themselves as the closest, meaning one of them is going to be spammed with sentry targeting noises as the server repeatedly corrects them. But if this edge case turns out to be annoying enough, it can be solved by making clients only predict that the sensor will target them if extrapolating the movements of the current target still results in them being closer. While fixing edge cases, there's also a lot of bugs unrelated to TF2's netcode, and most of them can be fixed with only a few lines of code, such as the ones involving the Huntsman's passive reload and headshot detection, which each take 1. At this point, I'd compile some of these changes into TF2 to show what they look like, but I had 2 weeks to make this, so here's an artistic rendition instead. Of course, it's worth noting that if the semiconductor fabrication plants can be repaired and reactivated within the next few decades, this utopia may soon be tainted by the impending tragedy of the future generations, who, if the computers fail, would never get to enjoy this beautiful game. Currently, TF2 itself is around 32 gigabytes, and various estimates say that a high-end printer can encode around 1 to 256 megabytes on a page, with lower densities presumably being more resistant to errors when decoded. With this, TF2 would take up around a few hundred or a few thousand pages, plus however many pages are needed to describe and recreate the x86 instruction set, and some regular English instructions on how to properly decode the other pages. However, much of this space is taken up by custom textures for unfitting maps and cosmetics, which, as I've said before, can be removed, saving more than half the file size, and additionally, there's numerous unused assets from Half-Life which can save a few gigabytes as long as they're checked to make sure they really are unused. Likewise, several models have multiple textures, and many of those are mere palette swaps for each team. If TF2 were even more compressed, those could be merged, with palettes or tins saved separately, to be split apart again when the game loads, or if this is done with a shader, it could even save some texture memory. The BSP files of the game's maps could likely also be compressed more, since by default the binary space partitioning stores the entire map as a space divided by flat planes, but in typical TF2 maps, most of these planes are rectilinear, negating the need to store a full surface normal every time. In total, I'd be surprised if TF2 couldn't be reduced below 4 gigabytes, especially if more modern compression algorithms were used, but I don't have time to prove that, so if I ever do, it'll be in a later video. As for its gameplay, the most convenient way to store it for future generations would probably be to include a version of the code that's uncompressed and uncompiled to potentially be compiled again later for whatever new hardware emerges. TF2's current source code is a bit of a mess, but with a bit of rearrangement it could likely be made a lot more readable, and with any luck, plus some careful maintenance, TF2 could be truly timeless, even outliving the apocalypse as populations return to industrial levels within several generations. So then, in our far more stable world, why is TF2 dying? Well, the answer should be obvious. In a real apocalypse, surely TF2's not important enough in humanity's collective culture to warrant all this effort taken to preserve it. And indeed, going this far during an apocalypse would be quite ridiculous. However, TF2 captures such a unique art style with characters who were cultural icons of the modern internet, and gameplay that took from so many genres and practically spawned a new one featuring mechanics and even code dating back to Quake. It influenced and was influenced by so much that to truly understand the history of video games or online culture without knowing of TF2 would be impossible. Its loss would be sorely felt by future historians, or just anyone who wants to appreciate such a work of art, and yet its status as a video game, and an online multiplayer one at that, seems to disqualify it from its preservation being worthy of any consideration. Meanwhile, Valve still makes millions off of this game, and though releasing the SDK and fixing the bot crisis were good steps, the game still languishes in their neglect. Sure, compressing and optimizing the game may take far too long to be worthwhile, but most of TF2's pressing issues could be fixed in the span of a few hours, and a large chunk of the remainder could be fixed by just properly vetting workshop content. Yet Valve refuses to do any of this, and there isn't even an apocalypse. This video may be ridiculous, but this is just as, if not even more ridiculous, because it's actually happening. Come on, Valve, where's my apocalypse? Updates? We don't need Source 2 or balance patches just to work a game again, but the chance that anyone from Valve is watching this is practically zero, so what can we do to get it? Well, I was working on something larger about this, but progress on that is slow, so I'll just summarize it here. Go for their wallet. Anyone still watching this probably isn't the type to buy map stamps for Emporium slop, but if you are, then stop doing that obviously, and on top of that, don't buy anything, and until Valve improves, keep complaining. Complain about the degradation of the art style, and how there's no cosmetics that are even remotely worth your money anymore. Complain about the friends who you really want to introduce to this game, and more importantly for Valve, its economy, but for whom you cannot, in good faith, do so, because this game's current state has left it practically unplayable. Complain about the 2 lines of code that could fix the Huntsman. Its passive reload and headshot detection have been broken for years, Valve. In the engineer video, I was actually going to use that last one as a bit of a litmus test, seeing if I could make a more traditional TF2 video, reminding people of TF2 at its best, but attempting to bring a complaint to light throughout, even if it's not the video's focus. Thus, it also cuts out most modern editions because it's primarily a TF2 video and they don't fit TF2. The only exceptions are Whatville, which I kept to make fun of, the Dogfighter, which looks good and fits TF2's art style well, but messes a bit with the engineer's color scheme, and so as much as I like it, it does hurt class readability and is only included because that's the cosmetic I happen to have on. And lastly, Bread's face, which only appears for a frame, and I still regret including it. However, the Huntsman thing unfortunately did not get noticed, at least suggesting that if Valve is to notice it, and complaints like it needs even more people complaining. Like, say, what I'm hoping might happen if I found out about a hypothetical TF2 video competition and rushed something out for it containing said complaint. It's not about the money, Spider-Man, it's about the Huntsman, baby! Though also, I'd really appreciate it if y'all also reviewed at least the Engineer Video's intro. I know that video isn't allowed in the contest for several reasons, but I want to make more cool intros like that one, and I just want feedback to make sure they're good. Okay, thanks, bye. See ya. Fix the Huntsman, Valve. You know you want to, even though you clearly don't, you lazy fuck.